6C. Discussion and possible action regarding implementation of Measure V, declaring intentionally killed and left standing trees a public nuisance. Supervisors Haschak and Williams. So, let me see. In December, we had a meeting. At our board meeting, we gave direction to code enforcement to do an investigation of the complaint that had happened against, pertaining to Measure V. And then we also created an ad hoc committee to look at alternatives and mitigations to what could be done with tan oaks. And so my understanding is that in December, that code enforcement did do an investigation. We will hear from code enforcement. And also on January 22nd, Supervisor Williams, was it the 22nd? No, it was the 29th. January 29th, Supervisor Williams and I conducted an ad hoc committee meeting. We had it at the Ag Department's conference room. It was an open meeting. There were representatives from MRC and also other landowners who do logging, and there were environmental activists, advocates for Measure V, and there was a representative from the UC Ag Extension. There were some other people. There was Bob Simpson, who has an idea about what can be done with tan oaks as economically viable alternative. And his idea was to use it for pulp manufacturing. He's been in discussions with planning and building in those regards. We also had Robin Thompson from the Laytonville area, who's worked in the logging industry for 30 years or so, and has an idea about what can be done on the lumber side of using tan oaks for flooring, for siding, and for other purposes. So it was a good discussion. Kind of the outcome from the Measure V ad hoc was that Supervisor Williams and John Anderson from Mendocino Redwood Company would get together soon and look at fire modeling for areas affected by the hack and squirt that MRC practices, and also that we'd come back together in a month and a half or two and look at what some of the ideas Bob Simpson has and whether it's economically viable, because he had a patent pending. And so we were going to come back and look at some of those issues to see what could be done to make it economically viable to use the tan oak. So with that, Supervisor Williams, do you have anything
I think
else?
you covered it.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll call up Trent Taylor, Head of Code Enforcement, to give a report on what he found when he went to do the investigation of the one complaint.
Good afternoon, Chair Haschak, members of the board, and staff. The same week we received the complaint, the same
Your name,
day
please.
Trent Taylor,
Thank you.
Interim Code Enforcement Manager. We received the complaint the same day the board made this directive, and so we had logged that complaint in, and we actually finished that investigation that same week on the Friday of that week. We went out to the area. I was personally present. I've been in that area before in the Big River drainage off of basically Ore Springs Road and the area of Hoe Road, H-O-E Road. We had previously talked to the complainant, and then we went out to inspect the area, and we could not identify any areas in that drainage where there were dead standing trees from our vantage points publicly available to us without going on to private property without permission. There's about 1,300 acres in that drainage that's owned by a major timber company in our county on 7 parcels. I did find evidence number one, that they have much published evidence on doing this remove or killing of trees in these areas. And we did find evidence with the Ag Commissioner of reporting of pesticide use on at least one of those parcels in the drainage. But that's a pretty big area, and without getting down into the drainage and knowing exactly where we were going, we couldn't see. The photos we got from the complainant were not very good photographs, and when we talked about them, I even talked to the complainant again yesterday, and she admitted that it would be very difficult to ascertain whether the trees met the criteria of the ordinance, and whose property they were on, although the vast majority of the holdings in that drainage are with the timber company. So at this point, we still have the complaint, but it's not, we can't ascertain whether there's a violation of the ordinance.
Okay, any questions from the board? Supervisor McCowan.
Did you seek permission of the timber company owner to go on their property?
If I could have seen an area that had dead trees from our vantage points, I would have, but I couldn't. I don't have the resources to hike 1,300 acres of land in that drainage. So no, I didn't ask permission to go on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the board. I'd just like to say that from this ad hoc committee meeting that we had, my takeaways also were that, sudden oak death for the oaks is a significant factor in the woods, that the use of F measure V is to be enforced, and those standing trees are to be cut down, then it could actually lead to the use of more herbicides, because the sprouting tan oaks is the issue, and if the tree is cut down, then the sprouts will come up more vigorously, and that could lead to an unintended consequence. And so with that, I'll give it to Supervisor Jurdy.
I just wanted to say that I think I'm probably not the only person in the room who was curious about today's agenda item, because it stated a couple of facts, such as the appointment of the ad hoc committee, which is the chair and Supervisor Williams, that their agenda summary that they wrote said that they met on the 29th. But that's all it said pretty much. It didn't go into any detail like you just offered just now about content of the meeting, and also that your agenda summary doesn't indicate any recommendations from the ad hoc. Normally when ad hocs come back they come with a recommendation to the board, and it's published with the agenda so people know in advance of the meeting what's being recommended. So at some point today, and maybe sooner rather than later, it'd be helpful if the ad hoc would make known to the rest of the board and the public what is the recommendation of the ad hoc committee.
Okay. Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you could note, Supervisor Jurdy and I submitted a memo, and this is the original action of the board on December 16th was two-part: to direct code enforcement to investigate the first complaint and report back within 30 days. We're a little beyond that. And then the second part was for the ad hoc to meet with all the people you described and bring back specific recommendations, which we don't have yet, but I do hear that's the intent. Again, that information wasn't really in the agenda summary, but sounds like we may be on the same page, that the intent is to further explore those options and bring something back. One thing I'd like to correct: the trees treated with herbicide don't resprout typically, and that's why it's used. If you could simply cut a tree once and you didn't have to worry about it, that would allow the conifers to release. I think the cost is roughly comparable to go in and manually release an area versus treatment with the herbicide. It's when they do resprout So if they're just simply cut manually but not killed, there is a tendency that they do resprout, and not all the time, but certainly some of the time, you have to go back a second or a third time. That's when it becomes economically disadvantageous to just do manual release. One other interesting aspect of this, I talked with a small timberland owner over the weekend. He doesn't use herbicide. He girdles trees, cuts the cambium layer all around the tree so that it will die. This is mature tan oak, which can be pretty substantial trees. He girdles them rather than any other method, because if he cut them and felled them, they would be crushing the conifers that he's attempting to release by killing some of the hardwoods. So, you know, it gets a little bit complicated in what are we really trying to accomplish in terms of forest health. So, you know, he admits he's in violation of the ordinance because he's intentionally killing the trees. He's allowing them to stand. And the other aspect of it, it's obvious from public comment, a main thrust of many of the public concerns, they don't want to see any herbicide use. And they think that Measure V actually prevents herbicide use, which it doesn't. It doesn't say anything about herbicide use. It only says what happens to the trees after they die. So.
Okay, Supervisor Williams.
I think the time to have the discussions about, is it a good idea, is it the best practice, or are there alternatives, that ended on June 7th, 2016, when it was passed by voters. And my worry, I don't mean to be getting applause here, but my worry is it's a slippery slope. If we start deciding after the fact to either veto or change the intent of voter initiatives because the board knows better than the people, that really stifles the voter initiative process. It's a large endeavor to collect the signatures. You need about 5,000. It takes campaigning, in some cases spending 1/25 as much as the opposition. And to go through that process and then have a board say, no, we don't think it's a good idea, we're not going to enact it or implement it or enforce it, doesn't set well with me. I mean, if we were to apply that, the next one I would look at is Measure B. I have some issues with the way the mental health is rolling out. I would love to change the language based on what we've learned, but I know we can't, right? The voters passed it, we're gonna live with that language. And so I think we should look at this in the abstract, which is how I brought it to the board previously. What respect do we give to the voter initiative process? If the people go through the process and they petition and county council signs off and it wins at a fair election, are we legitimately in a place to veto through inaction?
Okay. I'd just like to tell the audience to please refrain from clapping. You can do the silent wave. But, okay, I'm going to go to Supervisor Jurdy.
So again, I'll just restate it one more time. And I would like to hear it maybe before we get public comment. Can we hear from the ad hoc committee what is their recommendation so we all know what the recommendation is from the ad hoc committee?
Supervisor Williams.
Unless Supervisor Haschek would.
No,
Okay. So I think where the ad hoc wants to go is respect the will of the voters by following the law, fully implementing it. But where possible, work with industry. We're representing all people of the county. Some of the people we represent work in the timber industry, or they own timberland, and we're not against them, but we do need to make sure the law is implemented. So in good faith, if we can work together, that's the best possible outcome. That said, this has been discussed for a long time. This board, I think back in the mid-90s, it may have been 96, passed a resolution asking the industry to halt the practice. We have more than 20 years of looking at alternatives and talking about mitigations and kicking the can down the road. So I don't think past the 20-year mark, we can continue that approach. I think we do need to decide it's time to enforce. Hopefully that means industry will work with us and find a way to come into compliance with the law that's the least costly.
And I would say I'm in agreement with Supervisor Williams.
So is there a motion somewhere that could be brought forward that encapsulate that in a motion because I'm still not hearing a motion.
Do you want a motion before public comment?
No, I want public comment first.
I have one more.
Supervisor McCowan.
If I may, I have one more comment before public comment. So, no one is suggesting disregarding the will of the voters. Measure V says nothing about the county doing anything. Measure V doesn't appoint an enforcement officer to implement Measure V. Measure V is actually very simple. It declares that certain trees intentionally killed are a public nuisance. And it says that the owner of those trees are liable for any damages. Measure V is actually self-enforcing. Anyone that feels that there have been injured as a result of the practice that is being called a nuisance can sue to recover the damages. On the face of it, there's no role for the county to play. No one is negating the will of the voters. You're proposing that we step into a potentially costly enforcement process when we have many other critical priorities that we struggle with every day.
Okay, Supervisor Williams.
I'm suggesting that we make a decision, that this board decide either we're going to enforce it, and that might be asking council to help us with an ordinance to add specific enforcement language, or decide we're going to tell the people that the county will not be taking this up, they can use the courts. But I don't think it's appropriate as we approach the 3-year mark of its passage to leave it dangling. A decision needs to be made. We need to determine where we stand.
Okay. Seeing no more board comments, we're going to go to public comment. Okay, we have quite a few here, so keep your comments succinct, and if it's been repeated, you could just come up and say, I agree with the previous speaker or whatever. Okay, Isaiah Davis.
Hello, I'm Isaiah Davis. Thank you guys for the public comment. And I'm just up here. I want to express my concern because I am one of the younger people who live inside the Comshe area, very close to where a lot of the hacking, squirting, and herbicides is taking place. And recently it started happening, I guess, a little while ago, pretty close to my house. And right after that, my dog got lung cancer. So, like, I don't know, I don't have any proof that that's connected, but it was kind of strange. And also, I don't really want to wait until a fire rolls through and burns up all these dead standing trees to try to file a lawsuit. I don't want to wait for that to happen. I want to prevent that from happening. Because all the people that get all their stuff burned down and hundreds of gallons of pesticides are being released into the atmosphere, those people aren't going to have very many resources to sue a multi-million-dollar industry that has dozens of lawyers and infinite resources, basically, compared to the person who just lost everything because their house got burned down.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ellen Faulkner. And then Naomi Wagner.
Good morning, supervisors. Good morning. Back here again for the same thing after, for me, about 40 years of fighting with herbicides
Okay.
and pesticides, fighting against them. We were
Please state your
successful.
name.
Oh, my name is Ellen Faulkner, I'm sorry.
you.
And I'm from Redwood Valley. And we were successful in getting herbicides off the highways. And Caltrans didn't sue us. And they didn't sue us when we got herbicides out of the wetlands or what's left of them in Willits. And we did that. And now we want to get those herbicides out of the forest. And I understand that standing dead trees is the issue here. But what I would hope that the supervisors could see their way clear to do is to stop the practice of hack and squirt so we don't have a cumulative effect 20, 30 years down the road. These trees last a lot longer than 5 years. I discovered that after I misspoke, that they only last 5 years and then they fall down. Well, they last 10, 15 years, indefinitely, standing there being a fire hazard. And if the practice isn't stopped, it's going to go on for years and years and years after we're all gone. And maybe after climate change has wiped us all out, there'll still be a massacre in the forest. I don't think that's so great. But so what I'm asking you actually is to implement Measure V with an immediate cease and desist order to stop the practice now. And I think that might save us a great deal of trouble later on when we're all gone, save our children some trouble. Thank you.
Thank you. Naomi? And then Mad Strong?
Good afternoon. Naomi Wagner, west of Willits, and I'm here as part of the group called SAGE, Social, Environmental, Indigenous Justice. And this issue actually touches on all of those things. It's a social issue. It's because it endangers the public. It's a public safety issue. It's an indigenous matter because it kills tan oaks, which are sacred trees and have great cultural value and are trying to be restored so that Native people can have their gathering rights again. It's an environmental issue because of the damage to the environment that herbicides can do and do. And it's a social justice issue too, because we have the right to initiative, and that is being threatened here when supervisors can just pick and choose, as has been pointed out. I want to say something about code enforcement. It's a little shocking to me that they can't recognize a dead standing tree from a vantage point nearby. Mendocino Redwood Company has continued the practice of herbicides of hack and squirt for the past 3.5, almost 4 years. Over the past 3 years, they have used 12,446 gallons of imazapyr to treat thousands of more acres. They've now treated about, I think it's about 12,400, I'm sorry, I got the numbers wrong here, but that is the number for the herbicides. And of course, if you spread those herbicides out, you get a huge swath of dead standing trees. There's a video that we would like to show that we've not been allowed to show that shows the extent from aerial photos of this dead standing trees. I think that the reason that there's only one complaint, as keeps being pointed out, is because a lot of people are intimidated. When they make a complaint, code enforcement comes to their property, not to the property of the person they're complaining about. I think code enforcement needs to be much more diligent in pursuing the complaints and in communicating with the people who are complaining and assuring them that their information will be held confidential, because that's why we're not getting very many complaints. A lot of people are ready to complain, but they get cold feet at the last minute because they just feel threatened. And on that subject of being threatened, we see here a company who comes and says, well, if you make us enforce the law, if you make us obey the law, then we'll just use more herbicides. And lastly, on the subject of being sued, I think there's something missing in this picture here. All of the supervisors are acting as if they will be sued if they enforce the law. And yet the company has not actually said that they'll sue in so many words. They just kind of hold a chainsaw of Damocles over your heads. And so you think of the cost of enforcement as litigation. The cost of enforcement will be very low if the Mendocino Redwood Company complies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madge?
Good afternoon, supervisors. Here we are again. I'm Madge Strong, and I'd like to kind of reinforce what Supervisor Williams said, that the voters passed this law, and it is a law. And so we do expect the county to enforce the laws. And I don't think it's self-enforcing. I think the point that this younger gentleman made about the fire hazard, which is the main thrust of Measure V, is to try to keep from having all these dead trees out there as an enormous fire hazard, and to expect the victims of some future fire to then hold those people who violated Measure V responsible. They might be dead people they might have lost everything in the fire. This is totally an unreasonable approach. The reasonable approach is to treat it as a public nuisance under Measure V and to have code enforcement be instructed to actually investigate these potential complaints and future complaints, and to actually find where these things are happening that are threatening the public safety. So I hope that, A, you will in fact instruct your staff to enforce an existing voter-initiated law, and I hope that until the glitches are worked out, that you would instruct private owners to voluntarily, but to strictly follow this law. A number of timber companies are doing that, and there's no reason why they can't all do it. I think it's also fine if you want to help them find better economic uses for the tan oaks, great, no problem. But that doesn't invalidate the law that they are not to be leaving dead standing trees that are a public hazard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Beth Bosk. Next is Ada Stevenson.
Beth Boss, I'm from Albion, and I would like to see a motion made to enforce Measure V. I do not, excuse me? I can't hear you. I would like to see the board, a member of the board make a motion to enforce the intentions of the voters who voted for Measure V. I don't think it should be complaint-driven, nor do I think it should be given to the planning department, who are not equipped to make these inspections. I think you should involve the sheriff's department and hire a forester or a forest tech, have the forest tech find out which THPs included herbicide elements after the ordinance was passed by the voters. And when you find dead standing trees, go in there, hire somebody to remove them, and dun the company. Maybe my feeling that nothing in this county is accomplished without a measure of anguish for the company spokesperson to threaten you with increasing the amount of herbicides they will be using in these forests if you make them put down those trees is, you've just got to stand up against that. You can't be intimidated by that. You can't be guilt-ridden by that you would be responsible for increasing their use of herbicides. I don't know how many of you know about the Bronson override bill, because some of you weren't born then. It's the bill that preempts the local jurisdiction of pesticide use by the state overriding the Citizens Initiative that was passed by Mendocino County that prohibited the aerial application of phenoxy herbicides passed in 1982. That was a citizens initiative that had the support of the timber workers, as this initiative had support of the progeny of timber workers. Those loggers were being sprayed directly by Agent Orange from helicopters, and we won in court against the governor. Immediately after that win, the head of the assembly, Willie Brown, gutted a bill by Bruce Bronson, who was a first-term assembly person, who had some complaint about something else, and substituted it with the language that it is the intent of the legislature by this act to overturn the holding of people. Can I please finish?
Just
Because
wrap it up
I will, thank you.
very quickly.
The people versus the governor, and to reassert the legislature's intention that matters related to economic poisons are a statewide interest and concern and are to be administered on a statewide basis by the state unless, and this is a loophole, and this is a loophole that you should be
Okay,
entering,
Beth?
unless, I have one more sentence. Unless specific exemptions are made in state legislation for local administration. What's happening here in this
Okay,
county.
I've got to cut you off now. Okay,
Are you
thank
also
you.
going to, I'm a stakeholder here.
Yes,
I
we've had 3
circulated-
minutes.
No, I'm sorry. I
Well,
circulated.
I understand that. Yes.
But you have allowed John Anderson in the past, who is another stakeholder, who represents the
Well,
corporation that uses most of these
Okay.
herbicides, and he's
Beth?
increased its use of glyphosate.
Okay, Beth, but now's your time is up. Okay, we need to be fair to everyone. Everyone needs a voice. You know, we've already gone 15 minutes on this. We'll go longer, but your time is up.
I have one recommendation, that two of you go to the state assembly.
Okay.
And announce that you
Ada
are
Stevenson, please.
a county that needs that exemption.
Next speaker is Rosamond Crowder.
Good afternoon, supervisors and our audience in the back. I supported Measure V.
Ada, your name?
Oh, my name is Ada Stevenson. Is this on? My name is Ada Stevenson. I'm a member of the Caddo tribe in Laytonville. We could call ourselves Koyan. I supported Measure V based on several ideologies. One, that any poison, chemicals, herbicide, pesticide applied to a natural growing tree or bush, or whatever it is, that kills it, to let those trees stand for future use of a logging company. As tribal people, that endangers our cultural way together from black oak and tan oak. It's a staple of our culture. It's a cultural thing that we hold sacred to keep our families together in Mendocino County. The other things that we think about that circle of life, that everything that's on a tree or a bush that has come from an aerial place will drip, will cover the ground. The air will move those leaves. How far can the wind blow? Things will be impacted. Is there surface water nearby? Is there underground water, groundwater that may be impacted? I'm concerned that as a first responder and a medic, I'm shocked that these trees will be allowed to left standing and to die and to be harvested at a later date. I've seen all the fires here in California, in different states, and also up in Canada, and everywhere that they have applied some kind of this hack and squirt system, even if it's on a small area, it really impacts a great deal. And I'm considering also the air quality as well. I hope that the Board of Supervisors will please respond to the voice of the voters here in Mendocino County and check your moral compass, and please put people before profits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada. Rosamond Crowder, and then Margie Chandler.
Rosamond Crowder, well, I'm from the county area, south of Willits. And I would like to know, does every ordinance of this county have an enforcement component?
I think typically, if the intention is that the county would have an enforcement process, it would be included in the ordinance.
Does every ordinance have that spelled out?
Well, let's direct that to county council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not every ordinance does have an explicit reference. Many, if not most of them, do have some sort of explicit provision as to what the particular penalty or enforcement mechanism would be.
Okay.
Okay, so that's penalty, and right now, being that Measure V is going via code enforcement, if code enforcement finds that indeed there are dead standing trees, if they got a complaint that they could follow up on, and yes, there were dead standing trees, what would be the method of actually getting those trees down? Would there be a fine, what is the,
Well, that's something we haven't determined. So,
typically,
Just-
when code enforcement finds a violation based on some ordinance, a nuisance ordinance, my neighbor has 30 dead cars in his driveway, and, you know, it's, they're probably leaking oil, and so I call code enforcement. They go look at it. They say this is a nuisance, and they tell the person to clean it up. That's pretty much how it works, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like code enforcement, it's a method, but I don't really know how effective it is. And so I also don't think leaving it up to a fire victim to sue, because if you sue, then you would have to prove that those trees caused this damage on your property, and the ability to actually prove that those standing trees were the cause of, you know, this loss is pretty remote. So I think that's, you know, not a good way to enforce Measure V. Code enforcement is the way it is right now, and maybe it needs a little work, absolutely. And I also encourage you to request the exemption from the Bronson bill that Beth was talking about. So those are things I would like to see, and I hope there are a lot more complaints. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Margie Chandler. And then Terry DeSelke.
That was my first question, was please bring Terry up because she's important and needs to leave. I am here again to make the statement, or to speak about the complaint forms. My name is Margie, if I didn't say that, Margie Chandler. I am from Compshe, and a lot of my neighbors, my friends, my family live there and are wanting to put in complaints, but are fearful. They will not do it. They've tried, and then they back out, and that's going over and over and over. And I know the last meeting they came in and said, oh, we won't, nobody's name will be mentioned. Nobody will believe that. This is our county, and a lot of times things like that have not been followed through with. So there's a lot of people that have fear, just as I'm seeing that possibly our Board of Supervisors are fearful of going forward, of being sued. So are the people, and we need to stand up for the people, and we need to know that there are a lot of us that would be putting in complaints. It's not just this one brave soul that has done this. There's many people that want you to know. And I'm willing to fly them out and over. I've taken up senators and other important people to show them the damage out there, and it's, you don't even want to see it. But I would be willing to drive or fly them out there to show them, because I think rather than walking out there, it would give them a full sight of what's really happening as far as dead standing trees. So if that's something that you could help pull together, I would be willing to step in and make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry DeSelke.
Good afternoon, supervisors. So yesterday, my name is Terry DeSelke. Yesterday, I did go into code enforcement to see what the process was for them to come out to do their investigation. And they had called me probably a week after this Board of Supervisors meeting. It was right before the winter break. I'm a teacher. I left town for 2 weeks. I told them I wasn't going to be home, but that they could probably see those dead standing trees from Ho Road. When I spoke with the gentleman who was up here earlier yesterday, he said, you know, it is no secret that MRC is hacking and squirting, and there are dead standing trees everywhere. We see evidence of that. And I said, well, did you see it when you came out to Ho Road? And he said, well, we couldn't really see unless we went on to somebody's property, just what he told you. But at no point did I tell him that the pictures that I had provided were not good enough to show where the dead standing trees were. It's pretty obvious there are dead standing trees there. And the only thing that I told him was that if he was looking from Hoe Road, he may not have been able to tell what APN number, but it was definitely MRC land. So I guess there was a little bit of miscommunication there. My complaint addresses the issues that we've been talking about. There is an increased risk of wildfire to my home after I have taken the initiative to make sure that I've done fire suppression around my home and on my land. It also lowers the value of my land because of the dead standing trees in my view shed. That is my only view shed. That's what I see, dead standing trees every time I look out there. The law says that they need to be removed within 90 days of the poisoning. If this is not done, what's the penalty and what is the point of the law? Why is there no penalty for breaking a law that is the will of the people? If I break the law, something happens to me. It's no secret that they're violating the law. None of you think it's a secret. It's happening. I want to ask you one question, supervisors. If this were your land and it were your view shed and you lived out in the forest next to dead standing trees, would you be sitting here saying, oh, well, too bad. We don't have an enforcement. We can't do anything. I don't think so. I think you would make sure that there was something being done to enforce this law, the will of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last comment, Cynthia Reiser-Jevons.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Cynthia Reiser-Jevons. I would ask all of you supervisors, you know what the will of the people is, and I would hope you would look at this as an opportunity to protect the health and safety of Mendocino County, both the environment and the people of the county, because we all know that dead standing trees that have been poisoned are a danger to all of us. And so I hope you will take this opportunity to set this situation correct. Thank you.
Thank you. John Anderson. And the next is Maria Gillardine.
Hi, Board. John Anderson with Mendocino Redwood Company. Just wanted to make a couple points from what I've heard here. You know that in 2016 we had sent a letter as to our view of Measure V. And in that letter it does state that there is county code that says if there's any ordinance against the Right to Farm Act, that it'll be considered null and void. And so it seems to me it would be a good idea to take a look at that, to render an opinion as to, should this have been on the ballot in the first place, given that code that's in place. And it's also at the state level too, the Right to Farm Act. And let's see, one of the other notes I want to make here. I keep hearing comments that these dead standing trees are up for 10 or 15 or 20 years. And they do fall over in 5 to 7 years. This is temporary. When they do rot, then they fall over, they're unstable, makes sense. In some areas they fall down quicker because they're in windier areas. Other places it might take 7 or 8 years, but we see an average about 5 or 6 years. And I'd like to take out anybody in this room to go out and take a look at this. Some people in this room have gone out and taken a look at this to see this firsthand, because I get it that you don't blame me when I say this standing here, but would love to take whether it's one person or a whole group out to the Masonite Road or other parts of our property to look at this firsthand. And look forward to working with the ad hoc committee given all this. Certainly it'd be a good idea to look at some of the research that's been done on dead standing trees. The John Muir Project is looking at this in the Sierra Nevadas. And I found one research paper that talks about, dead standing trees actually have less flammability due to the fact that there's no fines in those canopies anymore. So let's bring up some of that in the ad hoc committee and see what information is out there.
Thank you. Supervisor Williams.
I have a couple of questions for John, if
Sure.
I may. So, part of what kicked this off, even though back, I heard 40 years ago, 20 years ago, the county was discussing it, there was a letter from MRC's Mike Janai, who I think was maybe a chief forester at the time, back in 2012. Now maybe he's president of Humboldt Redwood. I don't completely follow the org chart, but
yeah.
So in his letter, quote, he agreed to quote, leaving sufficient green space between treatment areas to reduce fire hazard, end quote. So you have an MRC representative saying that maybe the practice went overboard in certain areas. I think this was Navarro area, and the company would leave green buffers to mitigate the fire risk. So there was an acknowledgement that there was a fire risk associated with the practice. Maybe that's in dispute now, maybe you have new research, but I think that's part of what kicked this off. And then a couple months prior, in May of 2015, or actually 3 years later, May of 2015, he was quoted as saying that MRC would not file a lawsuit against the county should the citizens pass an initiative. He was speaking of Measure V. Is that still the case? Because we hear arguments on both sides. If the county moves forward, MRC will sue the county. We don't want a litigation expense because we have so many other priorities. You know this as well as we do. But then there's people who say MRC is not going to sue the county. This is the will of the people. The company recognizes that this overwhelmingly passed. What's your sense?
So
do you stick with Janai's statement that MRC will not sue the county?
That was done some years ago, but we don't have a position as a company as to whether we would file a lawsuit or not. We're not sure what actions are going to be taken. So yeah, I can't speak to that.
So I think what all five of us have in common is we want to find a way out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And what can MRC do to work with the people? I mean, the best outcome is everyone leaves this room satisfied, right? The people against it are happy because MRC has a transition plan. MRC leaves with good PR, keeps the Forest Stewardship Council because you're following all laws, and you have some way to do it that is financially feasible.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get to that stage?
Well, I think the ad hoc committee is a very good example. I think some of the ideas that Bill Smith, even though he didn't tell us exactly what his products were that he has coming online here, I think those have some promise. And so I would urge the board to, hey, give the ad hoc committee some time here to work on some of these. I'm not saying years, but in 45 days, it sounds like we may hear something promising there. So I would urge the ad hoc committee to keep working. And on your topic, Ted, there, the green spacing, certainly we do that still today, and that would be the point of some of these tours, take people out to show that, yeah, it's a patch here, and then a bunch of green forest and a patch here.
And I'll vouch for you. You have offered that, and every time you've offered it, I know people who've taken you up have been out there looking at it.
Yeah.
That's not my concern so much as, because it's been year after year, now decade after decade, there's a sense that we're just kicking this down the road. We're not serious about a transition plan. I would like to see the county not get into litigation with timber companies, right? This board's trying to represent everyone.
Sure.
But I kind of need your help in what does that plan look like? What is the timeline? How do we show the people that we're serious, that we will be transitioning? We don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but we're committed to it. Is there a way to do a memorandum of understanding that the county and the industry is on a path to coming into compliance?
I can bring that back to the company. I think keeping that ad hoc committee at task and not, just one meeting after another for the sake of having meetings, but actually getting something constructive done will go towards what you're talking about.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question also.
Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
Supervisor McCowan.
First of all, thank you for participating in the ad hoc process with my colleagues. I think that shows the company is willing to look for solutions here. I wanted to talk about one thing because it's constantly said the trees are a fire danger.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your experience with fire behavior in treated areas? I'm thinking, was it 2008 where the lightning fires, where that fire actually got stopped was when it entered a treatment area? Is that true?
That was true in some areas. So when we had 27 fires on our property in 2008, and many of those burned into areas where the TANOC had been treated. And myself, because everybody is so stretched so thin, I had 6 fires I was working on, and I was seeing the fire staying in the understory on these dead standing trees. They'd scorch up the trees about 7 or 8 feet. I actually have pictures of this from the Lodge Fire, which was a number of years after that, where CAL FIRE came to one of our roads and said, we need to backfire this area to stop this side of the fire. And I said, well, we've got 3 areas there that we treated the TANOC, and they said, that's okay, we still want to do this. And so I personally watched it and took pictures. Like I said, I got them back in my seat. Again, we saw just scorch marks staying at the base of the tan oak trees because they've lost their fines, and this is what the John Muir Project is finding as well. It's not due to treating these trees, but it's from the insect damage and decay that they've seen in the sears. The fines are out of the canopy, and the result of this study from Oregon State University was there's actually reduction in fire intensity in those areas where there are dead trees.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. We have another Maria Gillardine.
Mariah Gillardin, live up on Ore Springs Road. I'm a journalist more than a landowner or knowledgeable in particular about these items, but I agreed with everything I heard from people who were here on behalf of Measure V. That was really great. I did, though, once look into the right to farm, and there is an exception to the right to farm if it's getting to be a public nuisance, and you all know that, and that applies to MRC as well. And the county council has confirmed that twice, that limits owners' rights to endanger their neighbors. I'm kind of glad that I got to talk here now because I find it really disappointing. Well, first of all, John, thanks so much. You gave Beth a little more time. But I think what should happen, speakers here should be treated the same way. And why you engage in a conversation with John Anderson, but not ask Beth for more details about the Bronson bill she presented here, is really disappointing. That's something everybody should know and look at. And did you submit it? I hope this gets to everybody. What I'm seeing in this is more from an overall perspective. I don't believe anybody here is denying climate change anymore, and the urgency that practically every week that passes is a missed opportunity to do something, and that a corporation like MRC gets permission to treat a forest that is a cultural heritage, that's an ecosystem, that is a food source, that is a carbon sink. I mean, to look at our forests from the sky and see that we, at this time, are poisoning trees that are a carbon sink, that some even get paid for to preserve, is so totally idiotic. I'm sorry. There's somebody once said, you find out a fact about climate change, and he ended up by saying, and what did you do once you knew? And everybody does. And we're killing trees instead of preserving them.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
Okay, Ellen Drell.
My name is Ellen Drell, and I will speak on behalf of the Environmental Center. We want to support the comments endorsing the enforcement of Measure V that have been presented to you. And I also personally want to thank Mariah for her statement. It's so true. In addition, I want to say to the supervisors, you don't need to decide whether intentionally leaving standing dead, killing and leaving standing dead trees is a nuisance. It's already been decided by a vote of the people back in 2016. That's been decided. You don't need to figure that one out. And I think if you decide to enforce it, in the way that Rosamund Crowder talked about enforcing other nuisances, then I think MRC will join you in finding ways to make it work for them. And I think the best way to get MRC on the path of collaborating with the county and with the citizens is to determine to enforce Measure V as the nuisance that it's already been defined that it is. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've gone an hour on this conversation, so I'm gonna, this will be the last comment.
You can't prevent members
Oh,
of the public
we can?
speaking.
But, okay.
Excuse
we
me,
could limit it to
excuse me
10
for
minutes.
being late turning in my card, but
Non-agenda.
I was listening. As a concerned citizen, I'm representing my family and our timber holdings, and we do, in fact, or have incorporated hack and squirt into our forestry program. But in an annual basis or a 5-year basis, we do 20 acres of hack and squirt over 12,000 acres of timber. It is not creating a nuisance in my estimation, and I can't see how. What we did 3 years ago, 80% of those trees are on the ground because I just planted young redwood trees within that area. The trees that are standing are just the straight stobs. And as I'm climbing over this down material and stuff, it is so punky. I can guarantee you that it's not going to burn. So this is a 3 going on its 4th year of hack and squirt. I have quite a few acquaintances with CAL FIRE who have told me that when a fire is going through the woods and it comes to a hack and squirt area, it sits down, it dies down. I'm surprised that they have not come forward and provided this information. And forest fire is the only thing that can ruin Mendocino County or our ranch personally. And these horrific, catastrophic fires that we've been having throughout the state, trust me, 20 acres, 10,000 acres of hack and squirt is not going to save anything, and it's not going to be the cause. It's not going to make it any bigger. If we'd had a mistake last August, or October, I mean, this county could be a moonscape. We're doing a lot for prevention, and that's great. We need to do a lot more. But hack and squirt, to me, it's like to anybody who raises a vegetable garden, you weed it, right? So that your good fruit can nourish and do better. That's all we're doing on a much smaller scale, on a private scale, to hack and squirt for our forests. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any further speakers on this? Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good
Honorable
afternoon.
Chair and board members. I'm Lindy Peters, longtime council member in Fort Bragg, and been involved in politics and current events locally, and it seems like timber issues are always going to be here. But I'm not here on a political level at this point. I'm here to remind you that we live in a democracy. And as Supervisor Williams pointed out, he pointed out that the initiative process, which is a hallmark of our democracy, is very difficult. You have to have a cause. You have to write a petition. You have to gather signatures, standing out in front of supermarkets and picnic tables in front of the post office. If you get enough signatures, you get it on the ballot. If you get enough votes, it's approved. And now the constituents expect to follow through. So I think you owe it to the constituents to follow through what they expect of Measure V, as alluded to by Supervisor Williams. Now, earlier this morning, Supervisor McGowan, when we were talking about the urgency issue of the ordinance involving camping on county property, someone brought up the question of what about a lawsuit? And you clearly stated we're not going to be dissuaded by a lawsuit in the decision-making process. That shouldn't be the case here either. You should not be dissuaded by a lawsuit. And finally, your colleague, Supervisor Williams, is not a forester. He comes from a fire background. He's a fire chief. He's been out in the forests and he's seen what's out there. And maybe some of the questions you should be asking instead of to MRC in terms of potential fire danger should be directed at him. He's seen it. He was the champion. If I can use the term, he carried the torch to bring this to the board. The people voted on it. They expect action. And as I said, we live in a democracy. And our democracy right now is in danger at the federal level, at least in my opinion. So let's keep it alive at the local level. Go with the voice of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments from the public?
Devin Jones, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. I just want to remind the board, I think most of you are aware, thanks to the ad hoc process that went forward last week, that this is a issue that is bigger than one specific timber company, which is kind of the repetitive trend I've been hearing today. So I appreciate the efforts that have been moving forward. A number of our members who are small, non-commercial timber operators also use this practice. This is something that they've worked through as part of their management plan with their foresters for a long-term 50-year plan for those properties. So I just want to remind you guys that this is bigger than one specific company. And in terms of moving forward, you know, as this conversation evolves, if it's going to be a complaint-driven enforcement mechanism, then I think we need to look at the bigger picture of sustaining the forestry industry that we do have in this county, and which will be important to continue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further comments from the public, we'll bring it up.
My name's Alex Harder, and I just wanted to support the foregoing statements of everyone here, even the people from MRC who don't seem to have a current lawsuit planned. So that seems to be the status of that. And I mean, it's not so much a question of whether you have the courage to do it as whether they're going to pretend it's courage to start suing the county even though they've never said they would. Because they've had plenty of time to make up their minds about whether they're going to sue the county or not, you know. And so it's nice to have this democracy in theory at the local level, but ultimately the decision shouldn't just rest in the people or the Board of Supervisors or the staff, who often are exactly what the Board of Supervisors votes. It's a matter of the greatest good for the greatest number. You know, here we are as people. So thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no further comments from the public, we'll take it back to the board. Supervisor Williams.
Would you entertain a motion?
Yes, now I would.
I move we direct County Council to return at our next regular meeting with an enforcement plan focused on mitigating expense, and affirm our intention to collaborate with industry to reach compliance with willingness to fast-track alternatives where possible.
Okay.
Let me hand it to you. I wrote it down for you.
Yeah. Maybe we should repeat that. And is there a second to that?
I want to hear from County Council before a second.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would just ask if maybe we could have a little bit more time than the next regular meeting to prepare, perhaps 2 meetings out.
Okay. Is that acceptable?
If that's what it takes, yeah.
Okay, I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We'll have it repeated by the clerk, and then we'll go to Supervisor McCowan.
So we do have this ad hoc process which has begun, and your report said you would have another meeting in the next month and a half or so. The company appears to be, and others, numerous stakeholders, appear to be working in good faith to find options or alternatives to accomplish the intent of Measure V while avoiding a lawsuit. So I'll be interested to hear the motion read back. It seems like we're kind of short-circuiting the ad hoc process. We're not really interested in the mitigations, perhaps.
Okay.
So if we could have the
Yes,
motion read back.
we will.
I have a motion by Supervisor Williams, second by Supervisor Jordy, to direct County Council to return at the next regular meeting with an enforcement plan focused on mitigating expense and affirm our attention to collaborate with industry to reach compliance with willingness to fast-track alternatives where possible.
Well, I think we amended that next meeting to two more
The second
meetings.
meeting in,
Could I state that as the next available meeting?
how about the first meeting in March?
Okay.
That would be the second meeting.
Chair Hashak.
Yes,
We're
CEO.
coming up on budget development. And I think, so I'm looking at Carla. So February 24th is too soon for County Council to be available. And the 10th, I believe, we have a budget workshop. My concern about bringing this item forward on the same day as our budget workshop is that there just will not be enough hours in the day to handle both. So I'm looking at County Council, possibly if the board agrees, March 24th. Carla, I don't know what March 24th looks like.
We could make March 24th work.
Is that acceptable, Supervisor Williams?
I want to say no, but if it's all we can do, we're going to move forward with it. But I think we've been asking the people, I mean, we're 3 years in. I don't feel good kicking it out another month.
All right.
It's okay for, with me, and it would also give the ad hoc committee a little more time to meet.
Well, and if I may respond to that as well, the second point. So the ad hoc, I want to see industry and the county work in good faith to try to find alternatives. I think we're committed to that. But it can't be the ad hoc coming up with the alternative. The ad hoc is not going to think up what business should do. If industry wants to bring proposals and use the ad hoc as a tool for working with the county to determine how to implement and how to get it through planning and what's feasible within this county, I think that's a great use. But the ad hoc is not going to solve a business problem. That's not our role.
And I would agree with Supervisor Williams, is that my feeling about the ad hoc is that what I envision the ad hoc has been doing and will do is try to bring people together to try to solve some of these problems and let them solve it. We aren't going to be the problem solvers, but we can be the facilitators to get people talking. So Supervisor McCowan.
Well, I don't think the 2 or 3 ideas discussed are mutually exclusive. I think the ad hoc can work with all of the stakeholders and staff to try and develop and bring forward alternatives. I don't think it's either or. That's why you're meeting with a diverse group of stakeholders.
All right, any other comment from the board? Seeing none, we're going to vote by the button.
Motion carries with Supervisor McCowan dissenting.